Welcome to the podcast Stuck in the Middle, a podcast that explores psychological themes and issues of ambivalence. My name is Palan, a longtime educator and a social entrepreneur, and I'll be moderating the podcast today. Today, we will explore the theme, the psychology of creativity. And to do this, we have a great panel with us. Dato Frieda Pilus, a name synonymous with private schools and education, founder of Cempaka Schools. Datin, Noor, Azimah, Abdul, Rahim, Parent Action Group in Education Malaysia, vocal advocate for success in education and quality education. And next to me, we have Professor Gan, the Dean of the Faculty of Pharmacy from the University of Cyberjaya. We wish to explore the psychology of creativity through an institution that prepares the future citizens of the world. The school is an institution most praised and most criticized. To explore this issue, we will look at the work of Sir Ken Robinson, whose TED Talk generated 380 million views. And the book, Ken Robbins' The School, outlines some very important issues and is an international bestseller. He stressed the need for creativity in education, and his argument was that creativity must be given the same status as literacy. And he outlined the four purposes of education: economic, cultural, social, and personal. Of course, people define creativity in many ways, but largely they say it's original ideas, original solutions, discover new things, and problem solving. And we all know that problem solving is a fundamental skill in life. And the American Psychology Association says creativity is the ability to produce or develop original work. And psychologists and neuroscientists are exploring where creativity comes from and how we can increase our own. So, H.G. Wells said something very important, and that's what prompted me to buy this book. Because if you just move into the first page, I think it's right on the first page where he says, civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. So, let's actually look at the first question with our esteemed panelists. What is creativity and why is it important? So, to kick off, we will go to Dato Frieda first. What is creativity, Dato, and why do you think it's important?
Well, I think simply put, creativity is thinking out of the box. That's what it is, to be different. And if we look at ourselves, we are all different. The way we think, the way we look at things, we are all different. But how is it when we go to school, we are put in the box? We're supposed to be out of the box. In fact, I would like to ask, where's the box? What box? It should be a free flow of thought that eventually will bring about innovation. So now what has happened? We have sort of a curtail creativity, thinking. We're talking about thinking skills, and people put the word critical thinking skills, problem solving. But the way we teach our kids, the way our schools have been designed, it's like you're training them for a factory. It's like getting them ready to join the workforce in a factory. Well, it could be true many, many years ago because we needed that. It must be standardized. Everything must be zero defect, that sort of thing.
But every time, Dato, I've asked teachers, why are you doing this? Why are you boxing people? They say, but we have a curriculum to complete.
Our system should not be a centralized system. It cannot be top bottom. It must be decentralized. If I look at my schools, we are private schools, okay? The only thing we need from the government, the license, and we have to comply to certain standards. Like they say, okay, I've got to teach them maths, got to teach them science and so on. But they don't stop me from telling me how I'm going to teach the maths. What sort of maths do I need to teach? You know, that sort of thing. I have to teach history, like in the national curriculum, sejarah Melayu. How I teach them is up to me.
Yeah.
I don't have to read this book. My goodness me, Tan Sri. You have to plow painfully to read this buku sejarah. And I have become recently, well, I'm semi-retired actually, so I've become a volunteer, Museum Negara guide, volunteer guide. And now I bring my school children to the museum. In 2 hours, they learn everything about the museum, about our history, sejarah Melayu. And it's so interesting because then you have the artifacts there, and you have the anecdotes, you have stories.
Experiential.
Yes, and then there are books that you should read around the sejarah, that sort of thing. How do you know that Melaka, when the British wanted to take over, they had this Bencoolen Treaty. The Dutch took over Batavia, Indonesia, and Britain kept Melaka. So they destroyed Melaka because the British didn't want the Dutch to come back and take Melaka, so they destroyed. Then, you know what happened? The Formosa was kept intact. A few of the beautiful buildings were kept intact. You know why? Because Stanford Raffles, he was on sick leave. So he was there. He was there and he said, oh, these buildings are so beautiful, so iconic. Don't destroy it. There you are. You see, those stories make it interesting, And then when you see the artifacts, the art pieces, the scripts and all that, history comes to life.
True.
You see? And we want to encourage learning. How do you put forward the joy of learning? You only enjoy learning if it's you're passionate about it. You love it, right? But if it's dry, the way you teach it's dry, and
And people love stories, right?
yes, of course.
Yeah, and what do you think, Datin?
Well, to me, I think creativity is what begins actually when you're born.
Yeah.
I think that's when creativity is at its maximum. And then, so the way kids learn to speak, how they learn to crawl, how they learn to walk, they make sounds, they copy their parents. All this is actually creativity. The way they build blocks, they put things together and do them.
Get them to think for themselves, yeah. And then,
So and it's actually an independent kind of learning from the start, and then as you go into school, that creativity just dies, gets killed.
yeah.
Exactly what Sir Ken Robinson has been saying.
And maybe going to Professor Gan, I'm always curious, how do you teach pharmacy or chemistry in a creative way?
That is,
I'm
I
always
think you have to
curious.
use a lot of imagination, and
Right,
maybe hands-on, and
Right.
yeah,
Make it experiential.
yeah, make it experiential so that it's
Okay,
more engaging
okay.
and fun. Yeah.
Good, thank you. So, how can we make teaching aligned with, or maybe even before that, how can we nurture creativity in kids? Because kids are largely, children are creative by nature. They don't fear mistakes. Only adults fear making mistakes. Children never fear
No,
making
they have
mistakes.
no fear.
Yeah.
They have no fear. They just do as they please. But I think the role of the parent is to guide the children, so they don't overdo it.
Just a moment. But if you do away with examinations and testing, I know that one of the things that Ken Robbins always says is testing frightens children and all that. But if you take it away, how do I, as a Malaysian parent, go and say, oh, my son got 8 A's, but your child only got 5 A's?
Yeah, but that's the thing, because I think parents have to realize that they think that because there are no A, B's, and C's to be seen, they are not
Correct.
being assessed. They
Yeah,
are actually being
beautiful.
assessed,
Yeah,
because
correct.
school-based assessment, you still have
Exactly.
your term 1 assessment, term 2 assessment, and the minister has introduced the UASA, which is this Ujian academic, at the end of the year.
Sure.
So it's not that kids are not being
Sure.
assessed, they're just being assessed differently.
Sure,
And I think this way of assessment actually brings out their creativity.
Thank you.
I remember many years ago, some inspectorate came to the school and, oh, everything A. Datin, semua dapat A. And then after that, he said, you know what? I don't see any, the kata-kata hikmah. I said, what's kata-kata hikmah? All the proverbs, on the wall, like, what do you call it? Silence is golden and blah, 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 So I said, must I have it? Oh, yes. So when the children see it, I said, no, I don't need it because it's already inside here. It's already inside here. They don't have to see it and then put it here. Like, even in the public, I said, you put there, denda 500, buang sampah. What happens? The sampah is down there, I said. So you see, it must be something that they're passionate about, something that compassionate about, humility, empathy. This can be done from the ground. The principal, let's say for instance, if I'm in Kelantan, in a rural school, okay, I'll get the kids to plant. I get the kids to look after the garden because I have garden, but not in Kuala Lumpur, and take pride over it. Now, I've seen a school in Singapore. They don't have a garden, but they have a roof. And what did they do? They plant.
Roof garden.
Roof garden. They plant vegetables, they plant chilies and all that. So what is this? People are complaining about the rise of food stuff and all that. Come on lah, chili nak beli juga. Things like that. So they can understand the environment. In my school, Tan Sri, in Damansara, we planted paddy. Paddy, mind you. And teachers learn about it, kids learn about it. And then when it was harvesting time, and I didn't even know how to harvest. Go and get the tuai, go and buy the tuai. I was from the kampung, you have this thing to what do you call it in Malay, in English, the tuai, like a sickle, to harvest the paddy. And then they said, oh, they don't sell it anymore. I said, why? Because they send all their paddy to the kelang. Alamak. So I said, okay. And I got the children and the teachers to make it. So little kids were watching this, And then before the paddy ripened, birds came. I said, alamak, put a scarecrow there. The birds are not afraid of the scarecrow. So we had to cover it with net. So you see, that is creativity. You have a problem, you solve it. And this was done by the kids. They learned it, they did it, and then we learned to be umping, we learned all this. And when we talk about, we say we want children to be curiosity driven, but then you don't allow them to be curious. You want them to explore. You don't allow them to explore. You want them to experiment. You don't allow them to experiment. So how? You see?
Maybe I can add more to that. Yeah. So in a Scientific American article, creativity predicts a longer lifespan because it actually increases the neural network in the brain, and then it also causes the release of a protein called REST, which prevents dementia and also Alzheimer's disease. So this actually reminds me of my experience interviewing medical candidates into the medical school back in USM previously. So I was paired with a neuroscientist friend, and I can see that he was biased towards selecting potential medical candidates with a musical background that play either one or two instruments like piano, violin, or guitar, because the music actually increases neuroplasticity in the brain and causes the brain to be able to resist changes, and the person can become more resilient.
I
besides
remember
being creative.
reading about a dancer who had Alzheimer's, and then she couldn't talk, she did not that. And then one day she was in the dance studio, and some people started to dance. Suddenly she became alive.
She remembers back.
She remembers, So I suppose we have.
I think in one way, which is very much aligned to some of the research, is a very personalized approach to learning rather than conformity.
Yes.
Because someone tells me that this is a conformity. Now, obviously, I think nobody disagrees that the curriculum must be completed. Everybody would like to be completed, but we are not going to say the how of it. But what it is, I remember when my son went to Cempaka, and once Dato Frieda called us and said, well, would you like to send your son to Dallas for a debate competition? And my wife said, my goodness, Dallas, why are we going there? But then it was such an experience because the kids arrived there in Dallas. Then they knew what the competition was, it was exposure. And then they kind of took their own initiative, a very proactive attitude, because they saw all the American kids come with all kinds of thick books with the law and all that. Then they figured out what to do, and that was a great learning experience. Now you can put them in a room and teach them, but that's not going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
That's like what you were saying. Musical intelligence is not certainly a barrier for one becoming a good doctor. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I want to ask you, because you were talking about talking about some of the data that comes about and says uh, it how it actually kind of prolongs your lifespan. That makes me a little bit nervous. But you said something good. You said it also prevents dementia and Alzheimer's. So that makes me feel very comfortable. But how can we make teaching aligned with individual students' learning? Because I think Dato said this earlier. Learning styles differ, right? So when learning styles differ, how do you align? And I'm sure in a class in pharmacy you have a different student, some from Kelantan, some from Penang, some from KL. But how do you manage these differences?
So every student learns a different way. So there is a 1987 Fleming, he introduced a VARK learning style, VARK, which stands for visual, auditory. I don't know whether Datin
Use
Frieda.
process, yes,
Yeah. Kinesthetic and also reading and writing. Yeah. So I think most of us are visual learners. That means I think it's 65% of us. So we learn better when there are diagrams, colors, movies even. I'm also a visual learner. And then there is the auditory person who learns better by listening to music, discussion, lectures, reading out aloud. The person can even record the voice and then listen on the way to the university or even the way to work,
of
and keep
course.
on listening to it. And then the reading and writing, where the person can take notes. And I remember last time I had a friend, she takes very good notes from the lecturer. She will summarize it so well and combine with 6 different textbooks, and she can even sell the notes to others because they just read the notes and that's sufficient to pass the exams. So she's a reading or writing person, and there is the kinesthetic person who prefer movement, and like in that case you can do role playing, you can do experiments and so on. But I think a very good teacher will be able to combine all 4 different learning styles to cater for the different needs of the students.
Yeah, I think Howard Gardner I think from Harvard, he talked about the theory of multiple intelligences. He said some people can be a great musician, and I think it's let the child find its own path. And I remember many years ago when we had our first baby, my son, he likes to go to the garden. And so my British colleague used to say that he's going to be a gardener. But then my wife, being a very Asian thinker, said he's going to be a landscape architect. So the status is important. But then I found that sometimes great teachers, if they find, sometimes I go to the university at about 6 o'clock in the evening, 6:30, which is beyond class time. And then there's this professor of medicine, Professor Latif, and then he'll play the guitar, and then the students will be sitting around. And I thought, what the heck is this guy doing? But he's actually teaching medicine by playing songs, and people will clap, and it'll be on an Elvis Presley kind of a thing. But so I think different styles, different modalities, etc. Dato.
Well, I always like to go back to the system. I mean, we were talking about reforms or transformation of our education system, we go back there. Now, actually, in the world now, there's a lot of talk, and it's already happening to have an inclusive system. We are talking about the four of us here. We can read, we can write. We are considered normal. Though I do not like to see what is normal, what is not normal. Because there's a big description of all these things. And the inclusive system is where we want to bring about equity to education.
Exactly.
So people say, oh, equal education, yes, equal. Everybody get chance to go to school, but is there equity? That means, do we cater for the different styles of learning? We need a universal design for learning. For instance, in Japan, there's a school, in many schools now in Europe and America, even in the government, we say that they say they want an inclusive system. But it's not easy. It's not just saying, oh, we want an inclusive system. You need to change the mindset of teachers. You need a buy-in by the head of teacher. Because you see, before you have segregated schools, school for the blind, school for the deaf, right? Now it's, oh, we are inclusive. So take a few blind children, a few deaf children. But then they're just in the class. You do not include them. There is no collaborative, there's no cooperative learning. So it is not inclusive. So there is no equity. See, if I'm blind, there's nothing for me because I'm just trying to find out what's happening, Okay, there is an example of the school that taught children numbers by seeds. Trying to teach science and maths. Okay, everybody must bring seeds to school. Not seeds, but fruits.
Yeah.
So somebody brought, what do you call it, strawberry, avocado, whatever it is, So then the children are then told to cut it and to look at the seeds, right? Blind children cannot see. So the children who are sighted can see, help the blind child. So the blind child can see and feel it. Now they're supposed to categorize the seeds. So the blind child can do it. Can do it, right? The person who's deaf can understand, can do it. But sometimes the deaf children will shake. I mean, the blind children will shake the seeds to see because they want to categorize it. Small, tiny ones, or that can make noise and so on and so forth. So they have learned to categorize seeds, they have learned to count, and they've learned it together. Because I think the world needs people to have empathy for others, humility. How would you do this if you just outside they say, oh, Datin, tomorrow can you donate some money to the orang susah ni, sedekah lah. Then you feel, oh, sedekah, very good, But it must be from young that you feel, you have a sense of empathy. And in a Japan school like that, there is this boy who's a polio, he had polio, he couldn't walk, so he's in a wheelchair. And guess what? Every morning, the girls will line up to help him. And after a week, he was very cheeky, he would choose which girl. So you see, so there's no more feeling of, oh, he can't walk, he's not, he's different, or he's, now there's a sense of acceptance, respect, empathy. Those are things that you cannot learn from the books.
I know Dato is a proponent of inclusive education.
Yes.
Differentiated learning design for school reforms.
This must be done.
But I remember Dato in 2001, they had the US Congress passed the NCLB Act. No child should be left behind. And I remember that every time I see Datin in the news, always saying that please do not leave the government school because it's not good. But what should you do? I think you always said you must get involved with the parent teacher association. Maybe Datin, you want to just throw what was the logic behind your argument? Because I, as a parent, would just give up. I would just say, look, maybe I know,
You had me.
yeah, I have Dato Frieda. I would just go there. And my wife would say, now a child that would study, but then there is also these psychologists, we always have this debate between environment versus heredity. And we want the right environment as well. So, what was the rationale behind the page kind of say either arguing for PPSMI or saying no, you must get involved?
Well, when Page started,
Yeah.
it's now 15 years,
Yeah.
as a
That's
national
so
society.
fast,
Yes, yeah, amazing. And of course, it started with BPSMI, right? But that got abolished, so we lost. And then,
No.
and then kids who went through PPSMI, all my 4 children went through PPSMI, and I think they're doing very well. And then came DLP, of which I was a team. I was part of the team that came up with, formulated the dual language program. And now we're still fighting for its existence.
It's going back to equity, right? I think that talk about
Yeah.
equity. Just because I'm poor, it doesn't mean I go to the government school. That's not the right way. I go to the government school because it's probably a much more productive way of going to school, and it doesn't have to be cheap. It has to be of a certain value, certain
Yeah,
quality.
and not all government schools are bad. There are some very good government schools.
Yeah, of course.
Because otherwise, I think we're all in a straitjacket and we all come out the same. When we are we're supposed to be diverse, we are supposed to add to the richness of the human civilization.
Sure, sure.
I think if we constantly ask the question, how can this be improved, or is there a better
Yeah,
way?
yeah,
We
is there a
constantly
better way?
ask that question, then the creativity will come out, like new ideas about what to do with it.
Exactly. I think one of the things that he talks in the book is school reform, and he says sometimes we listen to stories which are kind of routine stories which are not necessarily true. So he talks about one story where there is a teacher who goes into one of the most backward schools. And in the United States, what happens is you don't get funding if you do not achieve certain standards, unfortunately. So this guy goes up and says, identifies people who are really poor quality students as they define them. And he says, hey, look, you are not very good in this, but you're very good in that. You are good in that, and you are good in that. And he raises the self-esteem. And the children put their own efforts. And then the school, he says, becomes one of the leading schools in that area. So I think that's basically what it is.
Yeah, what Tan Sri mentioned just now
Sure.
reminds me of something. There is a cartoon where there is a competition between the monkey, elephant, fish to climb the tree. And then the caption was at the bottom of the cartoon is that the fish will think that, if you judge the fish about by its ability to climb the tree, that means the fish will continuously think that it's stupid for the whole life, right? So I think, yeah.
I don't know whether any of you remember the Sandra Bullock movie about Blindside. There's this African kid who is this huge kid, and he lives in a impoverished slum, and she gets him out and then coaches and trains as personalized learning, like what Dato said, and he becomes an outstanding national football player. And Malcolm Gladwell says that people don't reach their potential because, unfortunately, even though there are many externalities, one of the key things is the teaching doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen that way in the school. So eventually they go and ask this boy, says, you have been a great national football player, you come from this slum. Why? How come only you are so good? And he says, it was because I was nurtured, I was mentored, I was guided. If only we could guide every kid in that slum, this country would have more than needed football players. And that's what it is. But I wanted to ask you something else because, Prof, you had USM 16 years, and then in Monash 8 years, and now in University of Cyberjaya. We talk about creativity. we talk about school reform, but most of the time it's either for an economic purpose or a social purpose or a cultural purpose or purely for a personal purpose. But then I wanted to ask you something. I want to ask you, is there any difference between teaching different learning domains? Because you come from a pretty science background in higher education. So how do you because we talk about balance, yeah. So how do you, Datin talked about PPSMI, dual language program, Dato talked about equity. So I want to ask you this, how do you go about different
I
learning
think
domains?
teaching science will be based on hardcore data, research data, and it's very objective. Whereas opposed to teaching art is more, I mean, there is more creativity. Even the emotive component of the students can be considered, and it's more subjective.
Yeah,
But,
but can you try and make science-based teaching more interactive, for example?
Yeah, so from pharmacy, we have the program called My Dispense, where the students can practice their counseling skills instead of on real patient, but on an avatar that can respond.
Okay.
And we can even customize the avatar to look more Asian looks to simulate the real situation. And then the student can make mistakes in a safe environment, if I can put it that way. Yeah, but a good educator will combine both teaching art and science in both approaches by using scientific knowledge and also adding personal touch to make sure that the teaching can be more engaging, impactful, and fun.
Great. That's interesting because I remember I must blame Dato Frieda for it because my son went to UK and then one day we had a call from the school from one of the professors and he said, "Where did your son go to school?" So I said, "Why? What's the problem? Did you do something wrong?" And he said, "No. This guy prepares in the internet the earlier day what questions to ask the lecturer. And he comes and asks, can you just tell your son to give me a break?" And then he records it and then he records the lecture and he prepares on it and tells me the next day what were the wrong things you did.
Oh my God.
So the teacher, the professor, or the lecturer confiscated that
Recording.
recorder. And so my son quickly called up that night and said, if let's say my lecturer asks you, you just say you were the ones who donated me. I said, but where did you buy this? Oh no, I bought it here because the teacher is pathetic. Doesn't do this. I said, no, look, Papa, is there something wrong in asking questions? I said, no, there's nothing wrong, but don't prepare to ask questions, That's a problem, right? So there's a fine line between the two. Maybe I must ask that, what did you do? You teach them to ask questions, yeah?
I must always be prepared because I always tell them nothing is impossible. So,
So as we come to the end of the program, there's only one more thing that I want to ask all our distinguished panelists. We live in a world of comparisons. And so today we have PISA, the Program for International Standards, which is age-based. I think it's 15-year-olds and very literacy-oriented. Then, of course, we have TIMSS, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science, which is grade-based. I think it's grade 4 and 8. And every time we have these comparisons, I don't want to talk about where Malaysia is at this point because that could be sensitive. Maybe it's not even relevant. But having said that, governments, sometimes school reform depends on who is talking about it. If we talk to a politician, they talk differently. If we talk to an educator, they talk differently. If we talk to, let's say, a religious school, they talk differently. So people have different objectives. So how do you overcome this kind of obsessiveness with standardization and conformity? Maybe we go with you first, Prof. Quick one, and then to Datin, and then we'll go to Dato before we wrap up.
I think we can take Taiwan as an example where they have done a major curriculum reform where creativity is instilled in all educational levels, right?
Lovely.
So I'm very sure there will be a lot of patent and copyright coming out from there compared to
Sure.
countries that go for a standard
Sure.
conformity, one single right answer thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So-
So what's a famous expression? Everything doesn't fit the same size, right? Not
Yes,
everything is
yes.
of the same
Yeah.
size.
So
right?
even that personalized medicine,
Wonderful.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a whole new area when someone asks what if, that question of what if. Like Walt Disney, he asked, what if ducks can talk?
Except don't record the lecture. Yes, Datin.
I think since we started participating in Teams and PISA, I think this is when we realized that our children weren't thinking enough, because this is what Teams and
Precisely.
PISA assesses: thinking skills, critical thinking skills, high-order thinking skills, problem solving. This is what Teams and PISA.
Sure.
So I think as a result of this, that's why we started to come out of standardized testing,
Correct.
3 do PSR.
Correct.
And so that we can get the children to think. We want to see the thinking process rather than
Sure.
kids, they don't know whether the answer is A, B, or C. They just throw the dart and decide. So we were actually moving away from that.
Sure.
So, and I think given time, if the teachers were able to conduct PBS
Sure.
in the proper manner, I think we'll probably see our numbers, rankings improve in Teams.
Thank you. So just take the results for what it is worth as one of those metrics, but then continue to focus on reform and continue to work on the child and let them pursue their paths the way they want it. Dato,
Yes,
your
I
concluding
agree. I
remarks.
think we should not worry about this ranking.
Sure.
And even now, or past few years, because of this ranking, a few schools have certain programs just to make sure the kids
Sure.
are given sort of work so that they can perform better. What about the other kids? I think
Sure.
we should look at our own problems and solve our own
A
problems.
holistic.
Yes, and like I said, the head of school, you must ask them, what are their leadership skills?
Yeah.
What style? What is
True.
the ethos in their school?
True.
Then, once the basic has been done, children are allowed to think for themselves.
Sure.
And now, come on, what are we talking about? AI is here, and it's there, and we are still behind talking. We really got to get out of this and come up with something really new, to be more imaginative, have a keen sense of observation, and the kindergarten child that you've put through to discover, to experiment, and to explore, you cut him short at primary school. Why can't these three things go on
Sure.
until
Sure.
university?
Sure.
To always have that imagination.
Sure.
With imagination, nothing is impossible. With belief, everything is possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Dato. So, in summary, I think the core purpose of education need not be forgotten. We need to address school reform for the right purposes, and we have to improve student engagement, improve teacher morale, empower the school leaders. And I think that's primarily what we wanted to say. But I think the most important thing, I remember Dato Frieda invited us for a function in Cheras. And I was, at that time, an international public speaker. But I was listening to a young kid speak. And that day it dawned upon me, lifelong learning is important. Learning
Yes.
never stops. And the young kid said, ladies and gentlemen, I asked my dad, how should I speak? And my dad said, 272 words, dear. That's what the best speeches are. And she finished exactly in 272 words. And the words hit like an impact. And this was, I think, a Form 3 kid or a Form 4 kid. And I said, we could learn from any place, any time. And I do appreciate the presence of all of you here today and joining the University of Cyberjaya in our journey to make education fundamentally valuable to students, however they define it, by understanding their motivation and expectations. Terima kasih and thank you very much for being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.